And, we take leadership in the army very, very seriously. The army has Sandhurst. And Herbert's point was that the colonel in the army, in charge of 1,500 people, will have had 72 weeks of leadership development at Sandhurst. A chief superintendent in the Met with a similar responsibility will have had 2 or 3 weeks of training. And that feels bonkers. A good leader makes all of the difference.
And I'm joined now by the Times columnist Emma Duncan. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Hugo. Nice to be with you.
Good to have you with us. Look, we should obviously start with this. It's the sound of fans going bonkers at Box Park in London during England's victory against Mexico in the early hours of the morning. Emma, can you think of anywhere you'd like to be less than a warehouse full of people throwing beer at 3 o'clock in the morning?
I mean, the horror. Though, to be honest, our breakfast table sounded a little like that because my daughter has strong feelings about these things, which I don't.
You didn't stay up and watch?
I didn't stay up and watch.
No, I didn't. I'm not sure my daughters even knew the match was happening. I did wake up, of course, at 4 o'clock as people started walking past my house on the way home from the pub. Speaking of people who were in the pub, I think we're joined now by Tom Whipple, who was in the pub. Tom, are you with us?
Hello. Yes.
It's heavy in the voice there, Tom.
Yeah, look, I'm in a very dodgy Premier Inn near or Travelodge, or no, we're budget hotel near Covent Garden, and I haven't slept much at all.
Well, look, we appreciate you staying up to speak to us. Look, you were at a pub called the Bull and Egret in Covent Garden.
Egret.
Yeah, is this your normal haunt when you're drinking in the middle of the night?
It was an interesting group for whom it is the normal haunt, a mix of theatre workers, friends of billionaires, and LSE students. No, it's not somewhere where I normally go. It was fascinating to see who exactly it was who wanted to see this game so badly that not only would they stay up, but they would travel to the pub and experience it communally.
Was it a nice vibe? Were people more sociable than is characteristic in a London pub?
It was actually. It really, really was. There was a real esprit de corps. We were the Englishmen, the happy few, whilst the rest of England was abed and counting themselves accursed for not experiencing this wonderful drama.
Did everybody share a toast to Keir Starmer for allowing the pub to stay open?
Oh, you could barely walk but for praise for our Prime Minister. It seems like this might be a turning point for the England team and for the England Prime Minister.
So look, the match was delayed by an hour. There was a lot of extra time. Were people wearying, or was it just a buzz right through?
I think buzz would be wrong. There was an acceptance that this was what they were going to do, so they might as well get on with it. There was one man who fell asleep for the delay. He just sat nodding happily in his chair and then came alive for the national anthems. There were other people for whom this did. I mean, much as with delays when you've got the players, for those watching, it can throw the entire sort of schedule of drinking and nutrition out, and there were some who realised they were now going to have to consume 2 extra pints over the course of the evening, and I think that had all sorts of knock-on consequences that were certainly visible come 4 a.m.
Any Mexicans in the pub?
I did not see a Mexican. There were a lot of Americans, and there were a lot of bankers from around Europe, but no, the Mexicans were hiding.
And look, when you left, and indeed right now, did you find yourself thinking, you know what, this is how I'm going to spend every Sunday to Monday night from now on? I could do this again.
Well, one of the main conversations was, have you told your boss? And what have you got to do tomorrow? And how are you going to pretend to be fresh tomorrow? My happy situation is that my boss told me to do this and so doesn't expect me to be fresh. But no, I have no intention of doing this again. I'm quite happy to wait and see it. Look, maybe the final. Maybe we'll all be up for the final. But no, this was. I was paid to do this. I was contracted to be there, and that was absolutely fine by me.
Look, Mike gets in touch while we're speaking, says, Tom's croaky reference to theatre workers sounds like some kind of euphemism. It does sound quite... It's basically... I mean, I know it's Covent Garden rather than Soho. It does sound very glamorous, very old London, Tom.
Well, I mean, there was old London. There were people coming off the shift. I mean, there was... I can't overstate how much extremely rich people were, because if this is your local and you live in Covent Garden, then there was one who was texting his billionaire and showing me the videos made by his billionaire Mexican friends. I shouldn't name names, but you'll have probably heard of them.
Gosh, Emma, do you wish you were there?
Oh, so much not. But I am quite amused by one aspect of this, which is have you noticed what's happening to this country? We're playing football well, the weather's baking, we're getting seriously good at making wine. We change prime minister every 5 minutes. We have become Italy.
What?
Italy, meantime, which failed to qualify, has become Britain. Sounds pretty good for the future.
Yeah, Tom, did you feel like you had a sort of certain Mediterranean class hanging out in the bars of Covent Garden with Mexican billionaires?
Yeah, look, there was, and as Emma says, it was pleasant in and out. We were spilling onto the pavement. We were coming back in. Yes, we certainly felt like, I guess, a great footballing nation. So hurrah for the global warming apocalypse. Let's go down with unstable democracy, and maybe we'll survive long enough that the good wine will be in vintage before everything goes terribly wrong.
So look, the Times' Gabriel Weiniger has interviewed Uri Geller, and he says he lifted the curse on England before the match. Tom, that's the big answer. That's why this happened. Speaking with your science hat on, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's fascinating why he didn't bother before, but I'm pleased that Uri Geller finally is getting in on the action, and maybe he's just run out of spoons in his house.
Tom, go to bed. You can read Tom's piece on thetimes.com with your subscription right now. Emma is still with me. Emma, let's talk about Nigel Farage, because there is that Sunday Times investigation which is still making huge political waves. They've reported that the Reform UK leader did not declare benefits provided by an ally previously convicted of fraud in the United States. George Cotterell's support included security and social media staff who worked on Farage's online content in the year before he was elected. Farage also used a property rented by Cotterell near Buckingham Palace. And in the latest story by the team, which you can read on thetimes.com, it says that Cotterell, a cryptocurrency gambler who once pleaded guilty to wire fraud and was imprisoned in the United States, handed out a business card printed with the Reform UK logo and Nigel Farage's official email address, despite having no formal role in the party. Well, the Lib Dem MP, Josh Burundi, has asked the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner to investigate. He spoke to Kate McGann and Stig Abel on Times Radio Breakfast.
I think the big question, Stig, beyond any individual investigation, which need to get done as soon as possible, is who else is funding Nigel Farage? Who else has got Nigel Farage in their pocket? Farage has made a big deal about taking back control throughout his career, yet he will not be straight with the British people about who controls him.
That is the Lib Dem Josh Burundi speaking to Times Radio Breakfast. You can join them every morning from 6 a.m. So, Emma, the crucial point here is that under parliamentary rules, new MPs must declare financial interests and registrable benefits received in the 12 months before the election, whereas purely personal gifts or benefits don't need to be declared. And Nigel Farage answers that all this falls into the second category, and he says, I've done no wrongdoing, followed the rules, and now I'm considering legal action against the Sunday Times. It's now clear the establishment will stop at nothing to hurt reform. We want to smash their cosy consensus. Emma, discuss.
Well, I think the personal friend of defence, there is a personal friend defence. It is very narrow, and it says that even in the case of gifts from a friend or relation, the gift should be carefully scrutinised, shouldn't be related to political activity. I mean, the guy, as I understand it, was paying for 3 staff to work on Nigel Farage's social media. Do you know anyone who posts social media that requires 3 staff to do that? It's pretty clearly political work from the facts that we've seen. Also, the notion this is an establishment hit job is a bit rich. Cotterell isn't just a convicted felon. He's also the grandson of a peer. Sounds pretty establishment to me.
Do you think his supporters, I mean, what political impact do you think this is going to have? Do you think his supporters, because he does have a lot of supporters, they are ahead in the polls, do you think people are going to care?
Yes, I do, because I think part of the Farage brand is that he's a kind of straight up guy who says things like they are. I think the notion that he is a bit sleazy and possibly dishonest in some of the financial dealings, as far as the rules of the House are concerned, doesn't sit comfortably with that at all.
And presumably, I don't know, it sort of seems to me that whether or not his supporters care has sort of no bearing on the legitimacy of the story whatsoever. If people don't care, that's on them, isn't it?
No, that's absolutely right, as far as the rules are concerned. But we're interested in this politically, obviously, because reform has been the astonishing political story of the past couple of years. And maybe it's peaked. And if it's peaked and if he's now going to go into a decline, maybe it's because of this. So that's why really we care about this story.
What do you make of the argument that if one is an outsider trying to break into the political system, and for all his like sort of long history in politics, that is kind of what Farage is. Reform is an outsider party. It doesn't have the structures of other parties. It doesn't have the history and the hinterland of other parties. If that is you, then you're gonna perhaps be, involved with some people who have a lot of disposable cash. You're perhaps going to be skirting around the edges of the rules and regulations. You're going to be moving fast and breaking things, and that's maybe what he's been doing. What do you think of that argument, Emma?
I expect it'll wash with some people, but I don't think it'll wash with the great majority of the British public. I mean, I don't think people want to be voting for somebody who's getting a lot of money from a Thai resident billionaire who's made his dosh out of crypto, and Farage is promoting the, getting rid of most regulations on crypto in this country. I don't think that's where most people want to be.
Well, look, coming up, Emma's going to explain why she was asked for details of her gender, race and sexuality before appearing on a panel to talk about Brexit. This is Hugo Rifkind here on Times Radio. Hello, Hugo Rifkind here on Times Radio, still joined by the Times columnist Emma Duncan. Emma, police forces need to urgently overhaul their leadership culture, according to an independent review published today. The report was written by the Labour Home Secretary, former Labour Home Secretary Lord Blunkett, and the former Conservative Policing Minister Lord Herbert, and they say the police are woefully underinvesting in talent and face perceptions of nepotism and cronyism. Emma, there's clearly a problem with public trust in the police. That's been obvious for a few years now. Do you think, are things sort of worse now than they've ever been, do you think?
I'm not sure that they're worse than they have ever been. I think they've been pretty bad for a decade. I think what's interesting about this report is the focus on leadership, because I think in this country, the culture of the amateur still pervades us a bit. The notion that, decent chaps will just kind of emerge from the ranks. We don't take the training of leaders all that seriously in lots of areas of life. And yet there was a very interesting piece in the Times from Lord Herbert, who was basically saying, if you think about the difference between a good school and a bad school, it's always the good head teacher. Leadership matters enormously. And, we take leadership in the army very, very seriously. The army has Sandhurst. And Herbert's point was that the colonel in the army in charge of 1,500 people will have had 72 weeks of leadership development at Sandhurst. A chief superintendent in the Met with a similar responsibility would have had 2 or 3 weeks of training. And that feels bonkers. A good leader makes all of the difference. And so I hadn't really thought about this, but I mean, the proposal to have a serious leadership college for the police does sound like a powerful one.
I mean, is it just about leadership? Is it also about what the police actually do these days? Like, we all know that they probably won't come if your house gets burgled, and they're certainly not going to come if somebody nicks your bike. And we sort of still believe in this golden former age of the Bobby on the beat, sort of wandering around and criminals scarpering as his sort of heels clipped around the corner. Is there something just very different about police that we sort of think are largely more sort of desk and car bound these days, that aren't out there as parts of the community they serve in the same way?
Well, they certainly aren't as much as they used to be, but that's partly because there are more powerful tools for policing than walking up and down the pavement. Data-based stuff, the video that they're getting from cameras all over the place, that requires people to be sitting at desks. So I think it's a bit silly to think that policing ought to be the way that it was. I mean, I do think there's an interesting problem about perceptions and reality of policing and people's trust in policing and their feeling about crime is kind of different to the reality. I mean, crime is very, very low at the moment historically, and yet people think that it's been rising. People are more scared of crime than they used to be. So there's an argument for having some police on the beat for that. But going back to the leadership thing, I think the central point of this report is a really good one that politicians should pay attention to. I think we probably should have the kind of college that they're arguing for.
Policing, of course, had a massive crisis in this country with, in the fallout after the murder of Sarah Everard, which made people question who the police were and how they were policing themselves. Since 2018, the police watchdog has begun 78 investigations relating to chief officers, 47 involving chief constables. That does suggest a massive culture problem. I suppose, Emma, there's an argument that British police are no worse than police anywhere else, but we are a country that investigates these things, and that thus makes the problem look worse. Whereas if they were just sort of left to stew in their own dirt, uninvestigated, then perhaps people might have more faith in them. Do you know what I mean?
I suppose that's possible, but it's certainly not desirable. I mean, I think one central problem with the police, which Mark Rowley has, the chief constable of the Met, has been banging on about quite rightly, is the difficulty of firing corrupt and incompetent policemen, police officers. And he's made some changes there. He's forced the government into making some changes. And that's really, really important. I mean, you can't clean up the police if you can't fire them.
Well, look, while we're talking, Emma, another Emma gets in touch and she says she's ranting at the radio. She has 2 sons in the police in Langston, Cumbria, and they absolutely go to every burglary and shoplifting report. Thank you, Emma. Emma also says, I love your shoe, and then gets in touch afterwards to say, I meant show, not shoe. Thank you, Emma. Other Emma, you wrote in the Times recently about what happened when you took part in a panel discussion about Brexit at the London School of Economics, and you were asked about your gender, race and sexuality. Why were they asking about this for a panel about Brexit?
Well, that's what I asked the woman who was asking me about these things. And she said, well, it's for our diversity agenda, which I guess implies that they're screening the speakers that they have at their events to ensure that they get a correct balance of presumably gay people, women, maybe trans people. And that strikes me as kind of daft, because the LSE ought to be choosing its speakers on the basis of whether they know about Brexit or endogenous growth theory or whatever it is they want their students to learn about. And this did set me thinking about the whole DEI overreach thing. Yeah, I'm tremendously supportive of the transition that the transformation of this country. You know, when I was a kid, I'm a lot older than you, Hugo.
Slightly older, Emma.
There was sexism was rife, homophobia was rife, racism was sort of, something people shrugged their shoulders about. We've changed this country a lot, and it's through, legal changes, through the equalities legislation. We've changed the country culturally as well as legally, and all of this is great. But if you push this stuff too far, to the point where even people like me are thinking, why? Why do you want to know about my sexuality and gender? Why would you pick people to speak at universities on that basis? Then you're going to get a pushback against it. And there is a pushback against it at the moment. And I sort of wish that pushback weren't happening. And that means that, the overreach, institutions that are doing this sort of overreach ought to think a bit harder about the reaction that normal people are going to have to that kind of thing.
I mean, I guess the counter argument would be that if they don't do this stuff, because people themselves have, I'm sorry to use the phrase, but unconscious biases, and they're going to, every panel is just going to have straight white men on it, because that people regard that as being the default. And if no one's even keeping track of this, then you sort of look around 5 years later and you wonder where, all the women and everybody else has gone. What about that argument?
Well, you do have to have a balance in this stuff. And I agree with you that, half a century ago, society did need to be pushed in this direction. But if you push it too far, you're going to get a reaction. And that's what's happening now.
Okay, Emma Duncan, thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure. You can, of course, still read that piece by Emma about being asked all those quite intimate questions before she was allowed to appear on a panel about Brexit at the LSE. That's still on thetimes.com. Emma Duncan, thank you very much indeed.